Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to do a bit of consolidation for you on the postmodernism stuff that I asked you to have a look at last time. So yes, you had to have a look at the PowerPoint that I sent you and also your packs to work through the postmodernism section. So what I thought I would do just to start is do a little bit of kind of the difference, a bit of a comparison between postmodernism and the social action approach. So that is what I'm going to do first of all. I've got my whiteboard here ready. I'm in my kitchen. You can see my shopping list there on the board. Anyway, so yeah, postmodernism and social action. What's the difference between the two? So I'm going to start by, and the personal life perspective as well. So I'm going to start by thinking about postmodernism and the characteristics of postmodernism. So I'm just writing some things down on my board here. So characteristics of postmodernism are that they believe that we now live in a postmodern era. So they think that since the 1980s, things have changed really dramatically to the point where we're now in like a totally different era. It's that different. So when you hear about people talk about like the Elizabethan era and the Victorian era, and the characteristics of those and how they're different from each other, postmodernists are arguing that we're in a new era completely. Whereas social action approaches and postmodernist approaches, they don't necessarily, social action approaches and including the personal life, they don't have that same belief. It's not like the basis of their theory. They don't have that same belief. They're more what we call late modern theories. They believe we're still in a modern era, which kind of began after the Industrial Revolution. So we're still in the modern era and things haven't changed that much. Okay, but that's how they're different. But they do have things in common as well. For example, both postmodernists and social action approaches take a little bit more of a kind of micro perspective because they are recognizing that like individuals are not influenced by structure. So postmodernism and the social action approaches both suggest that structural issues are less important than the more kind of micro choices that people make. So postmodernism and social action both have that in common. They think that structural issues are less important than the choices made by individuals. Okay, now one of the main ways in which they differ, and one of the main ways that the personal life in particular can be used to criticise the postmodernist perspective, is that postmodernists argue that we live in this time where people are very kind of individualised. So they have this individualisation thesis. Individualisation thesis, whereby they argue that everyone is quite sort of self-centred, really. Not necessarily in like a negative way, not necessarily that they're selfish, but we think more about ourselves rather than just following expectation. So we have choice rather than social expectation, and that we think of ourselves before we think about others. So that would mean that if we follow this postmodernist idea, they would argue that somebody might break up with their partner purely because they have fallen out of love with them, and therefore they're just going to split up with them and not even really think twice about it. Whereas in the personal life perspective, instead they have this connectedness thesis. And this point of view argues that, yeah, we do have choice to start and end our relationships as we wish, but we do consider others, but the choices we make are embedded in our connections with others. So people like Carol Smart would argue that postmodernists suggesting that we would just break up with someone without giving it second thought are incorrect. And that actually, if someone was to break up with their partner, they would also consider their partner's feelings because they would care about them. They might also consider things like their relationship with their friends. I think I talked about this in the last video, but just to reiterate, they talk about they think about their relationship with their in-laws and all that kind of thing. So we are actually very much connected to people within our lives, and they influence the decisions that we make. So that's kind of how the two are connected, and they're both in the same section because they're both kind of talking about choice, and they both ignore like structural issues and argue that the structural stuff doesn't have as much influence on us as it did in the past. But postmodernists argue that we have a lot more choice, whereas the personal life and the social action perspective think they kind of consider more in terms of the choices that we make and how we're connected to others and how other people will influence the choices that we make. Okay, I just need to grab my pack. Bear with. Remember, you can pause this at any point and go backwards and forwards if you wish. Okay, so I just want to take this time to go through this part of the pack with you to make sure I can answer some questions that I have over email, etc. You might keep hearing my email go off. Apologies for that. So we are up to now page 56 in your pack for the postmodern view. So if you follow along with me, it says in your pack that the postmodernist view of the family in a global society is that it, as an approach, the theory is neither micro nor macro, although it errs more on the side of a micro approach because it does look at kind of individuals and choice, but it's not necessarily associated with either one like really strongly. It's not really conflict or consensus because it's not trying to comment on whether society is equal or unequal. It's just saying that society has changed and commenting on like the choices that we have and things. They also see society as fragmented. So if you think about a mirror and if a mirror is like fragmented, it means that it's broken up into lots of different bits, and they do all kind of fit together, but not as easily. So this is like a direct criticism of value consensus. So functionalists argue that we have value consensus and we're all this like system of connected parts and that we're all really connected. Whereas postmodernists argue that now we are actually not connected because we all have very different beliefs and very different cultures. So we're broken up into these like fragments. That we're much more diverse today because people pick and mix, literally like pick and mix in the sweet shop where you kind of like pick the bits that suit you. So for example, like young Muslims are a really good example of this in that they pick and choose parts of their own culture to suit them and also bits of British culture. So young British Muslims, I mean. So for example, there was a study that showed that there were like young British Muslims who were taking part in like Ramadan and things like that, but wanted to kind of go to parties with their friends and things where they might have been drinking. So people will take parts of different cultures which suit them. It's risky, and this is according to Beck, sociologist called Beck, who says that we now live in a risk society because life and relationships are much less predictable now. They're much more uncertain. And that's because of this whole idea of choice, in that people can choose to get divorced. So in modern society, just after industrialization, things were really predictable because people would have got married and they wouldn't have got divorced because it just wasn't the done thing. It would have had a lot of stigma attached to it. And there was a lot of expectation that if you get married, you stay married. Whereas today, family life's really like unpredictable and a bit scary in some senses because it's so unstable, because people can just choose to get divorced and it's much easier than it was in the past. Much more equal, because there's more rights and more freedom, but it's less stable, back again. It's rapidly changing as well, so that's an important thing. So I've talked a little bit about Beck and Gernsheim and the individualization thesis, which links to Giddens too. And this bit at the bottom here is talking about that and how people are able to make individual choices a lot more. And this is due to things like contraception. So meaning that people can choose, maybe worth writing a note of these things next to it. So contraception is more widely available, meaning people can choose whether they want to have children and when they can have them later in life if they want. Same with reproductive technologies, which have meant, again, that people can have children later, or people who may previously not have been able to have children now can. Women's greater economic independence. So women don't need a man anymore. They can support themselves. They can be in a same-sex couple, and that gives them a lot more choice. Surrogate mothers, again, people can have children if they couldn't have done before. And also if they're older, can't carry a child for themselves, then they can have a surrogate. Sperm donor, same thing. Again, and same-sex relationships are more acceptable. So we've just had a change of attitudes, really, to be more accepting of different family types, which is giving people a lot more choice. So they claim it is no longer obvious who is and who is not part of the family. So this is another like similarity, really, with social action and the personal life perspective, in that they both agree that you can't just measure the family by like blood and legal relations anymore. You have to think about the choices that people make and who they choose to have as and consider as part of their family. Yeah, family names might be chosen now, even first names becoming more and more common for people to choose their first names. So in terms of relationships, this means that people are more likely to be in pure relationships. And I would like you to make a little extra note here about pure relationships. So pure relationships are basically this idea that if people do stay together now, then it's not because of expectation, because they don't have to stay together because of expectation anymore. It's not as much of a stigma attached in terms of divorce and family breakdown. So people, I'm just writing it down, people no longer stay together out of like duty, sense of duty and expectation. So they only stay together if they are actually in love. So that's what we mean by a pure relationship. Giddens argues that relationships have probably improved now because people are in pure relationships rather than feeling that they have to stay in relationships where they're not actually happy, just out of expectation. So that's what we mean by a pure relationship. Now, Giddens argued, and as I said, I'd like you to make a note of this, Giddens argued that same-sex couples are the pioneers of the pure relationship. So same-sex couples are the pioneers. So they're kind of like the first ones to really have experienced what it meant by a pure relationship. And that's because they were never bound. They've never been bound by any expectation or duty, or even gender roles. So what Giddens is arguing is that Same-sex relationships have always probably been pure relationships because they haven't had the same expectation to perhaps get married and have children and things and stay with their partner, because they are outside of those expectations already. So they've kind of pioneered these pure relationships. So these pure relationships are based on true love, which is what we mean by the concept of confluent love. So confluent love is pure and true love. Lovely. True love. But confluent love is quite unstable because while that's there, while the confluent love is there, people can be in a pure relationship. But this is suggesting that as soon as that confluent love ends, like if people fall out of love with each other, then the relationship will end, because people won't try and necessarily kind of work through things like they may have done in the past, where they were bound by expectation to do that. So if you've got confluent love, then the relationship stays. But as soon as that ends, as soon as people feel like it's not working for them anymore, they may end the relationship will end. So it's like fleeting love. Now, there's good things and bad things about that. Of course, it's a good thing that people can leave relationships that they're not happy in. But also it could be argued that that's partly why relationships now are so much more risky, because people do just leave relationships if they wish. Okay, so postmodernism then, all about choice, and it's all quite unstable and risky. Not necessarily a bad thing, but just a comment on how unstable and unpredictable it is. So, individualism thesis versus the connectedness thesis, a bit of a summary. So the individualization thesis, as we said, is the postmodernist idea, and the connectedness thesis is the social action idea. And can you also add there that it's the personal life, particularly, because it's smart, really, that's come up with this connectedness thesis. I'm not going to read that again, because it's really all the stuff I've just been saying, that postmodernists argue we're individuals, whereas social action argues that we are connected. Okay, the questions at the bottom there, I think everyone's managed to answer themselves at the bottom of page 57. But just send me an email if that's not the case, and I'll talk to you individually about those. Now, I know I had a couple of questions about this next page about postmodernity, globalization and the family. So you needed to pop in a definition of globalization, which was on the PowerPoint that I sent you. And then it says, why are postmodernists' ideas particularly useful for explaining the recent changes in the family? And it's because they take into account these changes like globalization, the world almost becoming smaller. It feels smaller because whereas it would have taken us like weeks and weeks to travel to somewhere like Australia, now we can do it in 24 hours, which is still a long time, but it feels like the distance is shorter because of how much easier it is to connect. And also we can connect with people in Australia instantly via the internet. So globalization, that's what globalization is about, the way that we're all much more connected, much more easily, and therefore the world feels smaller because it feels like we're closer, even though physically we're not. Okay, so effects of the changes on family structures and roles and relationships. And I think I gave you most of the answers for this in your PowerPoint, but the spread of ideas one wasn't in there. Bear with me 1 second. I just want to check the PowerPoint that I sent you and check what's on it. D block. Okay, so it's not working. That's helpful. I'm just going to carry on then. Okay. So increased migration, there'll be more living apart together families. So roles will change as well. For example, if like dad goes away to work, then mum might have to take on all of the domestic labour stuff. Migration also might have led to things like au pairs, who an au pair is like a nanny, a live-in nanny, who comes and lives with families, and that can affect the roles in the family too, because the woman may not have as much of a role in terms of like childcare and domestic work, and that might mean she can work, earn more money, that kind of thing. Also, different cultures have different family kind of values and ideals. For example, Southeast Asian families tend to be extended, and they respect their elders perhaps a lot more than we do, generally speaking. And therefore, if more people from Asian communities migrate to the UK, then we might have more extended families. Spread of ideas is the one that I think was missing. So this is really referring to the ways that globalization has allowed us to share our beliefs and values, and that they're kind of like spread globally. So for example, that means that here in the UK, we're exposed to and we know about beliefs and values of different cultures, like valuing extended families. And that might mean that some of those values and ideas might rub off on us. So it means there's greater diversity because we're exposed to these values and ideas. Also, we'll talk about this when we do beliefs next year, but there's this like spread of what we call liberal values, spread of values where it's kind of more accepted to be in any family type that you wish. And that can lead to more diversity globally, as things like acceptance of same-sex couples is beginning to spread more globally, and that kind of thing. Role of technology means that we can have living apart together families, because people can stay in contact, and we can have modified extended families, which means that they don't live near each other. So you may have like cousins and aunts and uncles and things who don't live near you, but you keep in contact with them via technology. And it's really worth noting, actually, as like a contemporary issue, that we're all using technology a lot more now to maintain our like family relationships and stuff. Don't know about you, but obviously I don't live with my mum and dad and stuff. But we're like FaceTiming and doing video chats and quizzes and things to stay in contact. So that could be actually a really good example of how we've all become modified extended families, or kind of living apart together, in that we are having to contact each other via technology because we've been separated due to this lockdown situation. Better transportation leads to more migration, so it's all the kind of same issues in the first box, but also that it makes it easier to transport and visit our family members, so it makes the links stronger between the family members and so on. I managed to get my PowerPoint to work now, bear with me for a second. Yes, so there we go, that's that. Also, we might be able to have more family holidays and things, which again improve our kind of family life and maybe relationships with our family members. Okay, last bit was to have a look at this 10 marker, and I wonder if I can do screen share on this. Doesn't look like it. No, that is fine. Okay. So last bit was to look at this 10 marker, as I say. You've got 10 mark question, analyse 2 ways in which individual choice in personal relationships has made the traditional nuclear family less important. Now, this is quite often a bit of a question in the exams. They quite often like to ask you about whether the nuclear family, or just the family in general, has become less important or less common for the nuclear family, that kind of thing. And the answer is not clear cut, really, because it has become less common, and it would appear that it's become less important because more people are getting divorced and things. However, it's still the most common family type in the UK, and people that get divorced tend to get remarried and that kind of thing. So I gave you a bit of help on this in the PowerPoint, which I'm now just looking at. So I've given you the two hooks that I think it would be useful for you to use, which are the first one being about how it is now more important to people than their responsibilities. Individual choice is now more important to people than their responsibilities to their family. So that could be hook one. Individual choice may mean divorce, which could be more important than maintaining family life. And you could link in there to the idea of confluent love and the pure relationship. That would be good, Giddens and all of that stuff. And then hook number two, people are choosing to live in a variety of different ways. So you could have there about how more and more people are in same-sex couples, and the traditional nuclear family is not that common anymore, but it is still the most common family type. And also most people who get divorced tend to remarry. These are things you could put in the analysis part. Okay. So there we go, that's the postmodernist section. You may feel like you were already quite confident on that, but I just wanted to take a minute to go over it with you in this kind of way so that hopefully I've answered any of your questions. Please make sure you email me if you have got any questions, and I can give you some answers. And yeah, I think we'll leave it there for today, and then tomorrow we're going to be moving on to the next topic anyway. So for today's lesson, if you could please make sure that you've really understood this postmodernism section. I'm going to also send you just some knowledge check questions on this section so you can check your understanding. And I might do like a concept grid or something. All right, so that will be coming your way soon. Thanks everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, and I will speak to you soon. Thanks.